In my last video, I talked about why so many of us stay in our jobs long after the joy has gone, and what it really costs you to build a life that looks brilliant and successful from the outside, but feels hollow and empty inside. And a lot of you got in touch. I had comments on the video itself and also private messages and emails. So many of you shared that the video struck a chord with you, and so many comments along the lines of, I know I really should leave, but honestly, I don't know how. Not the decision to leave, because I think a lot of you have already made that decision. But what I want to cover today is the steps to take to actually launch yourself into something new and different. What do you do when you finally admitted to yourself that you've outgrown where you are? So if that's you, stay with me, because this video is for you. My name's Lucy, and welcome to the channel Lucy on Life, where I talk about how to be happy at work and how to be happy in life, drawing on my many years of work-life experience. And if my voice sounds deeper than usual, it's hay fever season and I've got a bit of a cold, so I apologise. I don't know how this is going to turn out, if I'm honest. So something I've noticed both in my own life and in my work with other people is knowing what you need to do and actually doing what you need to do are two different things. The gap between those two things isn't weakness, it isn't laziness, it's something quite different. When you've spent 20 or 30 years building up your identity around a role, moving up the ladder, taking on more responsibility, putting your heart and soul into your work, moving away from it can feel like moving away from who you are. And if you move away from who you are, then who are you anyway? And I know this precisely because I've been through this myself. It feels really scary, and I felt exactly this. When I was working through some of the difficult transitions that I've experienced in my career, there was always a bit of me saying, what are you going to do next? Who are you if you're not doing what you do now? And that question can stop you completely. It can really stop you from making a change, and it can simply get in your way. So the first thing I want to reassure you is that this kind of disorientated feeling is completely normal. And the disorientation does not mean that you're making the wrong choice. It means that your choice making is serious, that you're being very thoughtful and deliberate about this next step. In my experience, there are actually three things that help people navigate from the moment that they've decided they need to make a change, but they're stuck, to starting to make moves towards the next thing. And these three things are not necessarily the things that you'd expect. The first one is to work out what it is that you're carrying. When I talk to people who feel stuck, the conversation usually reveals that the stuckness doesn't come from making a decision. It comes from things that they haven't really named yet, things that are in the back of their mind that aren't yet in the front of their mind. Sometimes it's guilt about the team that they'd be leaving behind, guilt about possibly destroying or fear of destroying whatever it was that they'd built, guilt about the mission that they'd been part of. And in the charity sector especially, this runs really deep. We got into this work because we care deeply, and caring can become a reason to stay long beyond the point where staying is doing anyone any good. Sometimes it's feelings of grief because leaving, even if it's leaving something where you're not happy anymore, involves loss. Loss of colleagues, loss of routine, loss of part of your identity, loss of a version of yourself that you've maybe been for a long time. And sometimes it's fear, really specific fears about what if I get it wrong? What if I'm unhappy in the next thing as well? What if the next thing is worse? What if I've left it too late? It's really important to do some work to identify these feelings, maybe write them down, if that helps. You don't have to solve these issues all at once, but getting it out of your head and into some kind of language reduces its power. You can look at it directly and start to think about, is this a reason to stay, or is this something to set to one side and move beyond? The second is to get honest with yourself about what enough actually means. One of the things that keeps people in roles that aren't right for them anymore is a number. Whether that's a salary, a pension, a bonus, a lifestyle that's got more expensive over time. Financial security, of course, it matters, and I'm not going to tell you that it doesn't, especially when you have financial dependence, bills to pay, a mortgage to pay. I know I touched on this in the last video, but what I want you to do is get really specific and write down what it is you actually spend each month and how much of that is a non-negotiable and how much is could you adjust. Sit down with the actual numbers, not the numbers in your head, but the real numbers, and work out what you actually need to feel secure. What I found when I did this work was that, in fact, the number that I had in my head was quite different from the number that I actually needed, and the enough was nearer than I thought it was. It's easy to build a lifestyle to match your salary, and then you tell yourself that that's what you need. But actually, if you sit down with the cold hard numbers and work it out, it could be that you need less than you think. Obviously, every person who's watching this, your circumstances will be different, but I do worry that some people get stuck in things because they think they cannot move, because they cannot survive with less, and maybe you can. When I first launched my consultancy, which was back at the very end of 2018, I looked at how much money I could survive on, and it was very, very different. So I was trying to work out how much money I needed to earn, how much money I needed to charge, how many clients I needed, what my day rate would be. I was doing all of that work. And I realised that actually the amount I needed was rather less than I was earning as a salary, which is kind of weird. And it was really liberating, and it meant that I could be much more flexible in my approach at that beginning point of starting that work. The third thing that we need to do is to start moving even before we feel ready. And I think this can be quite surprising, that we feel like we need to have everything sorted out, everything ready before we can act, before we can make a move. In a career transition, in my experience anyway, waiting for full clarity before you make any kind of move is the thing that will keep you stuck. So that's the thing that years ago, when I was applying for jobs, to move from the thing I was doing, I would only move once I'd got the new job. Of course, that's a completely normal thing to do. But when I got to a point in my career when I maybe didn't get the jobs, or I wasn't sure what jobs I wanted, then I would just stick where I was, even though I wasn't happy or I knew I needed to be doing something else. So it took moving on into a much, much less secure way of working and freelancing for a while to really give myself the opportunity to do different things, and I think that gave me a lot of clarity about the path ahead. But I wouldn't have had that clarity had I waited somehow for the fog to clear when I was in the permanent role I'd been in. What you can do is take very small moves or very small steps at this point while you're looking for clarity. So things like having conversations with different people who do different jobs, finding out about what they do, doing courses on things that might be interesting to you, talking to recruiters, finding out what jobs are actually out there, or researching online and seeing what different roles are there. Spending a bit of time with your notebook and thinking through what are the most important things I want to be spending my days doing. If I had complete liberty, what would I be doing? If freedom, if money was no object, if I didn't have any responsibilities, what would my days contain? And try and find out what the most important things are. Doing these things doesn't commit you, it doesn't force you to do anything, but at least it gives you the opportunity to think in a safe way about different options. What I've always found is that I find out what I think by speaking. So if I make sure that I'm having lots and lots of conversations with different people, then I listen to the way I talk about what's going on for me, and it gives me a huge amount of clarity. So find ways to talk to others about what you're going through, and listen to or help, ask them to play back what they've heard, and that can be hugely helpful too. I also wanted to talk a bit about time, because I think time sits under all of this. And that man that I mentioned in the last video, the man that had spent 30 years working in financial services and then retired and wondered why he had wasted so much time, that story I think will always stay with me. What he was expressing wasn't regret about the work. I think he was really proud of his career. It was regret about the time. It was regret about waiting so long, waiting. I'll do these things when I'm retired. I'll wait till then. And I hear this a lot from people in their 40s and 50s who are anxious about waiting too long. And that passage of time starts to bring a kind of urgency, fears around, I don't want to leave it too late, or even maybe I have already left it too late. But you haven't. I really, truly believe that. I truly believe it's never too late. But I also believe that the urgency is worth tapping into, not to panic you, but to give you a bit of a boost in the right direction. Time is clearly finite. We don't have endless lives to do whatever we want. So it is important to move forward and not have any regrets, not look back and think, I wish I'd done that, I wish I'd done this. So if that's you, you know that something needs to change. You need to be doing something different, but you're not quite sure when, you're not quite sure how, maybe you're not quite sure what. Then share. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What's the thing that's keeping you where you are? Is it the financial question? Is it the question of identity? Is it anxiety and fear? Or maybe it's something else entirely. And if this resonates for you and strikes a chord, then please do subscribe, as these are the topics that I continue to cover that people find helpful. I make videos every week on topics like this, on leading well, on finding joy in our career, on navigating difficult workplaces. I'm absolutely passionate that all of us should be fulfilled and happy in our work lives, whatever they are. I'm also pleased to share that I'm opening up a small number of coaching places for people who are working through exactly this. If you want to find out more, I'll pop a link in the description. And if you haven't watched my last video about why leaders stay in roles that hollow them out, then I'll pop a link to that one as well. Thank you for watching. I'm so glad you're here, and see you next time.